Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, you've served there extensively. Europe was very apprehensive that President Trump may concede, may force Ukraine to cede territory, even though indications were that territory swap or conceding territory would not be a part of the conversation on day one. But your takeaway from the 3-hour-long summit, sir?
Well, my takeaway is on a slightly different note.
Okay.
You know, President Trump's desire to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to an end is linked to his desire to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The Washington Post had commented last month that the road to President Donald Trump's highly coveted Nobel Peace Prize might ultimately run through Ukraine. Now, if you recall, in his inaugural address on January 20 this year, President Trump had said that his proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and a unifier.
Yes.
He has repeatedly said that this is the reputation he wanted recorded in the history books. And it's no secret that he covets the Nobel Peace Prize. Let me recall also that last month, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, had told reporters that it's well past time that President Trump was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war's complexity and the deeply entrenched positions of both sides, combined with the potential for shifts in the global political landscape, make ending the conflict a formidable challenge. So, what is Europe's take on this? Europe certainly doesn't want a settlement forced by the United States, and which is entirely against the interests of Ukraine and, in fact, of the whole of Europe. And it's not going to be able to, for President Trump to force a solution. And this is perhaps what has happened. Nothing major, I think, has been achieved. Though, of course, the White House had already tempered the expectations down. They had said it's a sounding out summit. But more than that, I don't think we can expect much from what happened.
Dr. Surva Kamal Datta, would European capitals heave a sigh of relief, or would they be disappointed with several commentators saying President Putin has walked away victorious, he hasn't conceded an inch, there is no ceasefire, the war continues, and he's got the red carpet?
Well, I would say Europe would be doubly cautious now after yesterday's and last night's meeting of President Trump and Vladimir Putin. I understand also that the biggest loser in this first round is actually Ukraine. Ukraine actually did not get what it was expecting. It was expecting an immediate ceasefire. President Trump was so shrill and loud before the meeting, saying that if there is no immediate ceasefire, he will just walk out of the meeting. And after the meeting, he sounded so hollow. So, and that is what the character of President Trump is all about. He keeps on fluctuating. He keeps on deviating from whatever he says. But the biggest winner out here, in my understanding, is like hats off to Russian diplomacy, as well as to President Vladimir Putin. He has personally won the first round. He has re-established himself, re-legitimized himself and his presence as a global leader, and especially with the Western Bloc. And what better than United States of America? Second is like in terms of the tariff also, I think President Trump has to give a lot of answers to the global world now after the explicits given by President Putin that, you know, there has been a 20% increase in bilateral trade between United States of America as well as Russia after the new regime came over. So President Trump has to give a lot of answers to China as well as to India and other countries on whom he has imposed sanctions because of bilateral trade with Russia.
He's threatened 25% additional sanctions on India, chickened out of imposing additional sanctions on China for the next 90 days. But as you very rightly point out, that if there is a bilateral trade, and as President Putin mentioned, 20% it's reached, Professor Latham, this would put America on a sticky wicket because the world is watching this very, very closely. But I'll come to tariffs in just a moment. The meeting in Alaska, the fact that President Putin said we are close neighbors, though separated by the Strait of Bering, no summit for over 4 years, ties were at its lowest since the Cold War, and that's not good. But the point that he raised, Professor Latham, the fundamental threat to Russian security, that needs to be addressed. The people of Ukraine are brotherly. Events a tragedy and great pain even for Russia. Is that an indication that Russia is friendly with the people of Ukraine? It's the regime that President Putin wanted to paint in a corner.
I think that's the narrative that President Putin would like the world to buy. And it's not without historical justification. The borders are, as are all European borders, very artificial and product of history, product of war in the past, product in this case of Stalin simply arbitrarily redrawing the internal boundaries of the Soviet Union at one point in the 1950s. And taking Crimea out of Russia and putting it in Ukraine quite arbitrarily. So there's that going on here. But there's a slightly bigger picture here as well, which is that the Europeans, I think, are exaggerating the Russian threat. I think after these 3 years of war, the Russian people and the Russian government and the Russian military have had enough. They're exhausted. It's not like they're going to get a ceasefire on their terms, favorable to Russia, in Ukraine, and then turn on Sweden or Poland or the Baltics. It seems inconceivable. And yet this is a very live fear in many European capitals, especially those that border on Russia. So it is a European issue in that respect, although it doesn't need to be. It could be treated as, here's the real problem. There are two issues, one of which is Russia's geopolitical imagination, which always includes Ukraine and Russia in the same political unit. But the other one, which people in Europe have ignored and have refused to face, is that as NATO has crept closer and closer and closer to Russia, Russian security anxieties have gone up and up and up, finally through the roof. And the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was when the U.S. started talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO. That is intolerable from a national security perspective from Moscow's viewpoint. And so it's hardly surprising when you put those two things together, this imagined history, let's just call it that, of unity of these two peoples, plus the fear generated by NATO expansion and NATO expansion and NATO expansion. It's hardly surprising that Vladimir Putin lashed out the way he did. Lots of blame to go around here.
Dr. Datta, your take on his comments to the American media. As of now, perhaps, maybe, and that's the term he's used, maybe no additional tariffs on India. He's spoken of China, but he's also spoken of India.
Well, I think the 50% tariff on India itself was quite a lot. And I think that's the maximum which United States of America in the current geopolitical and geoeconomic scenario could have afforded to do, and
no, but if I may, Dr. Datta, the additional tariff, is it beyond 50% in your impression, or this 25% tariff is there? The remaining 25% was to come later and not immediately.
Well, the additional 25% is supposed to come at the end of this month. That is the kind of a understanding which Washington had given. But the additional or the secondary tariff which he was talking about, I believe it was more of a hogwash and a kind of a rhetoric at the global level. And in reality, that would not have been feasible for United States of America. The comment which President Trump has given right now saying that, maybe there won't be any additional tariff on India, I think it is something like he's trying to, build up the broken bridges as such. And in my understanding, it's little too late now, because ultimately in international relations, there is no permanent friend, no permanent enemies. What matters is your permanent interest. Very soon, our foreign minister is going to travel to Russia. We will see a lot of things coming out of that meeting. The Chinese foreign minister is visiting India very soon. There would be a lot of permutation combinations emerging out of that meeting. What I understand is, like United States of America, as history has proved in the past also, cannot be a reliable natural partner of India. US has proved this in the past, and US has once again proved it in no deeper words this time. Also, President Trump always used to proclaim that
Okay.
he's the biggest friend of India, but in reality, whatever he has done, I think no other president of US in the past has done that. So I think the bridges have been burnt too much, and it is something which is very difficult to repair.
So
It will
let me
take
bring in
another
Rohit
25
once
years
again
for
into this
US to bring
conversation.
back India.
Okay, Rohit, the conversation that is happening right now in the United States of America is more about Russia and the United States of America and, of course, Ukraine. So, are there those who say that the president tried, but now the ball is entirely in Ukraine's court? And when it comes to tariff, is this furious backpedaling by the United States of America? And what are your sources telling you? Now on the 25th, when the American team is supposed to come to India for the 6th round of talks, is that happening? Is that still on the cards?
So yes, the USTR has not indicated that they're pausing anything. They're going to be proceeding with traveling to India to continue negotiating with India on the trade deal. That's number one. The other thing about, I think President Trump, uh, honestly, in this case, is trying to use every leverage that he had, including putting those additional tariffs of India to bring a Russian president on the table to negotiate, which he's successfully done. As far as the ball going into Zelensky's, court, look, I think it's also shifting, some responsibility over to Zelensky. And he's agreed with the Russians. He said that he talked about land. He also talked about NATO. So I think, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, yes, there could be a deal made, and he's not losing any territory. It's Zelensky who's going to lose territory. It's Ukraine. It's NATO. It's European Union. They are the ones with the highest stake into this war. So I think he's also putting them on the spot. He's
Okay.
also advised Zelensky to make a deal. So we'll have to wait and watch what second round becomes of it. Is it going to be one-on-one, or it could be trilateral, as suggested by President Trump?
And the indications are it could well be a trilateral, a bilateral between Russia and Ukraine, with the American president perhaps sitting in on that meeting as a guarantor of peace between the two countries. Will it be like that? We do not know, but that's just intense speculation in the world media right now. But Ambassador Sikri, your appreciation, how do you see the developments that are taking place? John Bolton said it's a victory for President Putin, though not a defeat for President Trump.
Well, I think that, yesterday when we were talking about this, we did think that ceasefire would be a very good outcome. But it hasn't happened. But the body language, especially the statements coming from President Trump, show that he is not dissatisfied with the outcome. He's calling it productive. He called it a 10 on 10, as has already been noted. So I think that he is happy that he started the process of dialogue. Now, let's see what are President Putin's strongest points. A, the commitment on no movement of Ukraine to join NATO. That's a very big point. And the second point is, of course, about the territories, about the swap of the territories. Now, on these 2 points, it is quite clear that President Putin has not given in, and he has outlined these as his red lines. But what he has said about it, whether there's going to be a partial swap, whether it is all the 4 provinces or just 2 provinces, all that is not known. There is known that President Trump will now talk to the European leaders and to President Zelensky. It is important for the European leaders to put pressure on President Zelensky to agree to the conditions for a ceasefire. And I think that from President Trump's body language and from his statement, it does seem that A, he's expecting a positive outcome in his talks with the European leaders and with President Zelensky. And 2, he is looking forward to a fairly quick resumed meeting with President Putin, perhaps even in Moscow. So I think that the body language and the statements that have come out of it, we saw President Putin's very clear statement that also was not despondent. It was very a warm statement, a happy statement. And, the way that they met on the red carpet and the way that they were welcomed, and they both took off almost simultaneously from Anchorage after the meeting. I think the next 4 hours are crucial. Let us see what happens. And President Trump, as you said, let us see, because, we had these horrible statements by his senior cabinet colleagues about putting additional tariff on India if the talks don't go well. But I don't think he has concluded, President Trump does not seem to have concluded that the talks have not gone well.
Niranjan Marjani, before I come to that point for elaboration in greater detail, What is President Putin saying? Root cause needs to be eliminated. All legitimate Russian concerns must be addressed and taken into account. And there has to be a fair balance in security sphere in Europe. And this fair balance is something that Europe, Ukraine, and Russia just don't agree on. So are we back to square one?
I think what President Putin is saying is, of course, about NATO's eastward expansion, and he wants a guarantee that NATO would not expand eastwards and would not add any more members, and particularly would not make Ukraine a part of NATO. That is what he has been saying about Russia's security concerns, and which need to be addressed by European countries as well as America. That is what I understand from what President Putin spoke when he spoke to President Trump during his meeting said. But having said that, I think it would have been a mistake to expect any solution or any ceasefire from this meeting, because right from the start, I personally do not believe that it had got anything to do with Ukraine, because Ukraine was not invited. It was just a meeting between US and Russia, and if anything, it did grant President Putin legitimacy, and particularly the way the Western countries have been, avoiding contact with Russia, or like Russia
Yes.
has been a pariah in on international stage. Now I think Putin does have legitimacy to engage with US as well as other Western nations.
So
At the same time,
engagement with the US has already taken place, Ambassador Sikri. The way you have seen Europe react in the past, especially since 2022, will Europe, whether it's Germany or France or the United Kingdom, will they have to furiously backpedal, or will they continue to arm Ukraine? And can they afford to arm Ukraine without the United States of America? Because President Trump yesterday made it very clear, while he loves that big, beautiful check that he was getting from NATO for selling weapons to Ukraine, he wanted peace. He wanted loss of lives to stop.
I think you're absolutely right, Gaurav. The key factor now is the extent to which President Trump can persuade the European leaders, put pressure on them to come along with a ceasefire, because it seems, as a broad outcome of the meeting, that the outlines of a deal seem to be on the cards. Something has been agreed to on the cards, but it could not be, there's no use announcing it right now at the Anchorage summit if immediately the European leaders are going to oppose it and say, no, we don't agree, and this is all unacceptable, etc. That would be very, very embarrassing for President Trump. So now, if indeed President Trump and President Putin have agreed to the outlines of a possible solution, beginning perhaps with a ceasefire, he must get the European leaders on board. If he does that, they will be able to put pressure on President Zelensky to also come on board. And of course, there's a very key factor that President Zelensky is really not legitimate anymore, because he hasn't held elections and there's no parliament that he can go back to for any kind of approval. So the key is now, I think, the next 24 hours, when President Trump is going to be having these telephonic conversations with, I'm sure, the Prime Minister of the UK, with the Chancellor of Germany, and President Macron,
yes.
others. And will President Zelensky come on board? President Zelensky will come on board if the European leaders agree, because the European leaders are in fact the only, shall I say, block between a final agreement on the ceasefire and President Zelensky agreeing to it.
Okay.
If the European leaders are with President Trump, that's it. The ceasefire is done.
President Trump, by all indications, Dr. Sekho, has indicated that when journalists, put that question to him, will US give that security guarantee that Ukraine so desperately seeks? He said yes with Europe, but not in the NATO format. So, on board Air Force One, that conversation was taking place. So, is that very clear? No NATO format security, some kind of a security guarantee, but then that would also have to take into account Russia's concerns that to demilitarize Ukraine is a maximalist position, but the number of soldiers and the kind of weapons they have will have to be put in check.
Absolutely, Gaurav. The NATO enlargement has been at the forefront of Putin's core concerns, not since today, but even in 2014 when he annexed Crimea. So now he's very clear that it's one of the key points that he is against Ukraine being given NATO membership ever. And this is something which the NATO powers and the Europeans would need to agree to. But some kind of a guarantee, because Zelensky, he may not be legitimate or whatever, but he is the president who is
Indeed.
negotiating right now. And he would need to, he is accountable to his people who elected him. And he cannot wish away Ukraine's security guarantees. So it has to be something, I feel it's going to be something which Putin will first have to agree to. And maybe the US would try to put certain mechanisms in consultation with Russia to ensure that there is either I can't foresee into the future, but there's going to be a no first attack or something like that, because the pressure really is on Ukraine at this time, because ever since, the last few months we've seen Russia has made rapid advances and is annexing territory. So the territorial exchange or return of territories is going to be the other contentious issue. And along with that, some guarantee would have to be given to Ukraine, because otherwise, what peace are we talking about?
And you cannot
Both
have a
parties-
permanent LOC kind of a situation like you have between India and
no,
Pakistan, because
we
that would be
cannot.
a festering wound, Niranjan Marjani. You look at the situation on ground right now, even now forces before the ceasefire are inching forward from the Russian side, hoping to maximize their gains. And indications from the Russian side are their core concerns, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye. There is no relenting on that. Kherson, we do not still know whether that could be used as a bargaining chip, but Russia is hoping to maximize its position as much as it can. They want to maximize it.
Yes, definitely. And Russia has been making very rapid advances since last few weeks we have seen. And of course, if there are talks again between, say, USA and Russia, or maybe including European countries and Ukraine, then Putin would certainly like to strengthen his position by gaining maximum territory. Whether or not he will agree to exchange the territory during peace talks, that remains uncertain. And I find it difficult that Putin will agree to any territorial exchange. Also, the thing is, if he does not agree to any ceding territory that Russia has gained, then again, I think there won't be any peace, and I don't think this issue will be resolved, because then European nations would again feel threatened with Russia's advances, and Ukraine would again look forward to guarantee. But
So
the thing
there
is
is a
here,
step
what we see.
forward. Both sides are saying it's a step that's been taken. The environment is positive. Constructive is the approach. The next meeting, will it take place in Moscow? Will it be a trilateral? Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. We'll track that story very closely. To my guests, many thanks for joining me.